Alright, hey there guys, welcome back to some more Warno. Today we're going to be doing a deck overview and maybe a few opening tactics and things like that, in general considerations for how to use the deck or how I use the deck specifically. So we're going to be doing the 3rd Armoured Division. It's been one I'm playing a lot at the moment. I've been using it in tournaments and it has been working quite well for me. It's a lot of fun to play. So we're gonna run through each of the tabs, kind of going over the selections I've got and how they go into the game. So starting off with logistics, 2 command vehicles. There's a reason I bring in 2 here as opposed to some in the other slots. Is you don't want to run out of commands, and playing like mostly 1v1s is what it's built for specifically. You do need a fair few if they get taken out. There's a lot of zones you need to capture, so I do bring 2 of these guys. You could bring these guys, but they are unarmored. Max damage is only 5, so I kind of prefer just going with the 6 on these 2. M35 supply tracks, 800 supply, 25 points. Yeah, pretty good using them. You kind of spread them about, and it's not too much if you lose one. 2 units of those, and that's mainly to resupply the more expensive units elsewhere I have in the deck. Moving on to infantry. Start off with the TOW2. It's a really strong unit. In some cases you might be able to downgrade it to the ITO. If we just pin this, as you can see, 25 penetration to 20 penetration, same range, 10% less accuracy, but it is 25 points cheaper. The reason you would kind of downgrade it from the TOW2, I would say, is if you're going up against, say, the 4th mid shooter and 7th mid shooter, something like that, you don't really need the 25 penetration, and it's probably better off going with the cheaper and more availability on the ITO. So that's something to consider if you know what deck you're playing against. Then we've got engineers with the satchel charges and engineers flash. So these guys I'm both bringing in the M113 A3, and I do this because it's not that much more expensive, and it does provide a little bit of fire support with this heavy machine gun. And most of the fights these 2 are going to be engaging in are going to be close quarters, anti-infantry kind of engagements and fights. And they're most likely, because of where they're going to be positioned in woods and buildings, going to be coming up against the same kind of units, or anti-infantry. And so it can actually be really useful to have the M113s there, because these guys can't really do anything to these unless they get close. And so having them as fire support can be really handy and help swing those engagements in your favour. Moving on to that, we've got the engineers of dragons. A lot of people do take the mech rifles, but they're just way more expensive. I mean, 55 points here for the engineers of dragons with their transport versus the mech rifles here, which is 85 points. Now, obviously you don't get the M249s and 1 less man in the squad, but it's still 10 men, 10 M16s, and you get the dragon. I think they're just definitely more worthwhile and cost effective. So I have got 3 squads of them, so 18 engineers with dragons, and then I do bring some mech rifles, so it does help out. I don't have any kind of close range AT on this deck. It's kind of annoying because, like, the air rifles, military police you could bring, but yeah, I do prefer having bit more killing power of these mech rifles combined with the engineers for the cheaper option. I can kind of create a good front line with. All in the M35s, just trying to make them as cheap as possible. I don't think you really need the M113 A3s with them. Moving on to artillery. The M106A2 mortar. Obviously artillery is not great at the moment. You got this M109A2, but it doesn't do that much HE, and it's just, yeah, not really that effective, quite slow firing. Clusters 100% are not worth it at the moment. They're far too expensive, takes too much supply and do too little damage to stuff, so just ignore these. Mortars are good because you can smoke and provide a little bit of fire support if you need to. So it's definitely worth bringing a card, especially because they're only one activation point. So yeah, bring those in, and that can provide all the cover and smoke you need. Tank-wise, so we've got quite a bit going on here. I do bring a command tank. I'd like to have like an armoured option for a zone if it's heavily contested. M728 CEV. Always bring these. 105 points, 13 front armour, and 3.6 HE on that front gun. These are amazing against infantry units, great for supporting your infantry fights and engagements, and these, honestly, these shred infantry units. Just need to keep them at a bit of a distance out of the AT range, and avoid other enemy tanks, and these guys are going to do a lot of good work for you. Got the M1A1s here and the M1A1 HAs. So I've got these guys on elite. I kind of are about taking them at veteran or on elite. At the end of the day, in a 1v1, you're not going to bring too many of these units in because they're so expensive. So you're probably better off up-vetting them, getting their accuracy even higher, fire rate as well. And so I bring 6 M1A1s, 2 at elite, 4 at veteran. These kind of give me a bit more numbers. I might need to sustain a front line and go toe-to-toe with other tanks. And then for the HAs, I bring 4 on veteran, and then 1 elite. Again, 305 points each. They are expensive, but they are going to be really good. There's going to be a lot of micro of these tanks to keep them alive, to avoid clusters, ADGM, side shots, all of this stuff. But we'll go over that when we get into a map. Looking at the Recon deck, Bradley's really strong at the moment with the TOW 2, 70% accuracy, and the auto cannons and stuff like that. It's got good optics, mediocre stealth. These are really, really strong early game. And you definitely want to be putting them out there just to kind of hold open ground and support your early infantry. For early infantry in the Recon, we do have these LRS. I'm an R between taking these, the LRS, and the Scouts. Obviously, the availability on LRS is pretty low, which isn't great. But they do have AT, even if it's just a law, but that's usually good enough versus other Recon stuff. Whereas the Scouts, they don't have any. So I kind of prefer these guys to take early positions and just hold until I can get support there. And then we've got the OH-58 Scout, just a nice Scout heli. It's kind of good to have these about. And 6 availability is really nice, so that's kind of your mid and late game scouting unit, but you do need to be careful with them as well against enemy AA. Speaking about AA, we got our own Stingers, 2 squads of them at veteran, which boosts their accuracy up a little bit to 80%, which is obviously really strong. You can take 12 at base of 70, which, you know, might be worthwhile if I'm thinking about it. I like having a lot of availability on these, and bumping them up, that's okay. What I would say is if you're going against either the 39th or 79th, something like that, it can be worth bringing in an OH-58 to deal with their AA choppers. But it's kind of up to you and what deck you're playing against. But I usually like to bring a bunch of Stingers and the Chaparral. Not great accuracy on it, but 6 HE, which is really nice. You want something a bit beefier than the Stingers, which only have, well, they got 5, but Chaparrals just have a bit more damage, and a decent fire rate. So pairing these guys up, you should do pretty well. Keypads aren't great at the moment, I just wouldn't really use them, they're not worth it. Onto the helis, we've got 4 AH-64A Apache rockets, 120 points, super cheap at the moment. You get all of these 70mm rockets and the autocannon. Yeah, these are really important for this deck. Early on, you need them, because otherwise it's really hard to hold ground and not lose the game without these guys. Obviously, vulnerable to planes, so you do need to protect them and micro these guys quite well. Keep them alive as long as you can, because they're really going to help you out. Finally, air tab, F-15 Eagles, really important unit for this deck, protecting those Apaches and gaining air dominance. They're a really strong unit, you just need to be careful with them to not get too aggressive, otherwise you will lose them. Wild Weasel, something you can pick and choose whether you bring it or not. Depends on the deck you're going against. Obviously, if you're going against something like 8th Infantry or 3rd Armoured, excuse me, you're not gonna need it, because if we look at our own AA, it's the same as 8th Infantry. Chaparrals, was it Fire and Forget? PVAD is radar, so you will target them, but Stinger's obviously not going to target. There's not really much for it to do against 8th or other decks which don't have a lot of radar AA. So in that case, I would switch it out, and I'd say probably go for, I mean, get the cluster, you can help against early tank rushes, or the HEs, or you could go for the Phantom AA if you really wanted to like get full air dominance, but I'd probably just go with the cluster and get 3 of those along with the F111E HE. But we'll put that Wild Weasel back in. That's kind of my default setting with it, and that's the basic deck that I'm using. I do switch and change a few things around depending on what deck I'm going against and what's going to be useful. Just make sure that's saved, and we'll pop into a skirmish mode, and we'll just go on to Death Ray. Okay, so obviously you want to examine kind of the map and where you want to be pushing, where you want to get aggressive, and where you want to stay more defensive. So we'll start off with kind of the scout stuff. I usually always bring all the LRS I can. Okay, with 2 here, 1 in the center, and then 1 over this side.
Call for a cab? Bring us there, taxi. Yes, sir.
Now, you do have to play
Bring us there, taxi.
generally quite defensively as 3rd Armoured early game. It's really tough. You don't have that much forward deployed units. Your tanks are expensive, so they're hard to bring in. We're going to push the Bradley up to there. But you can use your Bradleys as kind of supporting units, and then I'd say at least 2 Apaches.
Sky is ours.
So we'll push 1 on this flank, and you kind of want to put it a little bit further back from your units. These rockets have got over 2,000 meter range, so 2,100, and we can kind of look, yeah, so their range is all the way over here, from back here, and this keeps it out of range of any AA which is going to push up. And then on this side, not going to be too handy in the center, so we'll put it over to the left, and again we'll kind of look at the ranges where we're looking at and where we can get line of sight. So we'll just put it there, it should be hovering above, and it should see all the way down that road and be able to hit units. And you just want to keep that in mind about where its hover height is going to be, where it's going to be able to see, and where it can provide that fire support that you need. And grab another Bradley.
What are your orders,
And that's just going to move pretty up to here. It's got a nice line of sight down this road and along here. And that's kind of like the basic setup you do. You want LRS covering the board, Bradleys to cover open areas to stop any armoured pushes, and then Apaches are going to cover kind of where you think the big pushes are going to come. Now, for units at the back, you are going to want a Eagle to start, which obviously is very expensive, 300 points off the bat, but you need it to protect the Apaches early on. And then going back here, we're going to grab Engineers with Dragons. And you need these guys
Looking for enemy planes.
to just kind of shore up your entire front line. just spread these guys out as well. Move you in there.
Need a ride? We'll deploy at this position.
Move. Oh,
Checklist completed. Ready to go.
that was the right there. Yeah, so you want engineers just across the board. And this is all about just surviving the early game. Until you can build up the armor later on. And then we'll bring in 2 stingers. Got to decide where we want them to be. Yeah, one on the left and one on the right. Obviously, by themselves, they're not too effective.
We'll deploy at this
You
position.
kind of need them in pairs to be really good, but I will split them up at the start. Just because not only they're going to do damage, because they're most likely going to hit, but they probably won't kill. However, they will be a deterrent against any other like helicopters or planes pushing in against them. And that's it. That's it for the start. It's kind of the basic opening strategy. What units I bring in for most maps, actually, it's pretty similar. We'll just launch. You can kind of watch and see how the stuff moves. Obviously, Apaches have got to take off, so it takes them a little bit of time. Yeah, we'll see stuff start to ping in. On the first tick, I'd usually bring in probably an M728, because you are going to start to get into the infantry engagements and there's not going to be too much armor. So M728, on this particular map, I bring it out to the right hand side, just to support in these woods. Yeah, see, so these guys will arrive first, so you can't get too aggressive, but once they get here, they can unload, and the Apache,
Captain and his crew,
as you can see, has
welcome you
good line of
aboard.
sight, and we'll be able to see down here. Now, when you start firing, let's see where it can see. Yeah, so look, it can fire up to there.
Opening fire.
So when it does fire and it's been shooting out, it takes out a lot of their units or whatever. That's obviously going to become a big target. So at that time, just pull it back, get out of line of sight, maybe even land it. You just want to protect these as much as you can. Now, it's kind of hard to micro the Apaches, so that's why I bring 4 in total.
Checklist completed.
But you
Ready
do
to go.
kind of want to just play around with them, push them up where you can. If you see AA pushing to a spot, just rotate them back and around and then push them elsewhere, or just keep them a bit further back. Bring in some of the wild weasels. You can use these guys to help your Apaches push. So have your Apaches a bit further back, just kind of waiting out of AA range. Wild weasel comes in, and Apache pushes with it. Now you might lose the Apache if they keep their AA on, and obviously it's not radar, but if it is radar based, this can be really strong.
Raven 4,
So this will come in, disable or destroy the radar AA. Apache pushes in and does damage that it needs to. Once the wild weasel's kind of out of range or evacs, Apache pulls back and you try and keep it safe. Hopefully both units survive, but you'll probably be able to do a bit of damage and make it back alive. Now with the Eagles, early on you can kind of move it wherever you want really, in the center and things like that, but kind of a bit later on you'll want to kind of move it around the side if there's space on the map. But moving it around the side makes it avoid like the majority of the AA, which will be in the center of the map, and then now it can target the planes at the back over here without too much danger. And then when you go to evac it, make sure you pull it out to the side again, let it turn that way, and then evac it now. There you go. And the same goes for the wild weasel and like any other planes really. If you have them on like a fire position, say here, have them come in for it, and then when they are near it, just give a like queued order to turn to the side where you think the least AA is going to be, and then as soon as they start turning, you can evac, and they'll go that direction on their evac route, and it just lets them avoid the majority of AA and gives them more chance of surviving. Yeah, so that's kind of the opening. Pushing it once you've held like this, maybe you can get aggressive in a few areas if your Apaches do a lot of damage. Here's when you start to bring in the heavier tanks, so maybe some M1A1s. So start pushing them up, and this is going to be all about building up your tanks. And bring in some Logis as well, put the pressure on a little bit. But these heavy tanks are going to be your basis for how to win this game, really. Tanks and the Apaches.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to go over a bit of micro for the tanks.
Halt!
Obviously you got all the commands down here with their respective hotkeys.
Reverse, but keep facing the enemy.
Things like that. So you just want to be able to quickly react with these hotkeys. So we've got smoke position, which is a bit finicky at the moment, but really helpful.
Roger.
Make sure you keep facing front armor. If you do get a bombing run coming against you, a lot of people like to reverse,
Reverse.
but
Keep facing
reversing
the enemy.
is a lot slower than
Roger.
going
Redeploying.
forwards,
Out.
so you're actually better off just accelerating ahead, moving to the side, or just trying to avoid that bombing strike in any way you can. Preemptively avoiding them as well, and the way you do that is if your tank has been engaged by another unit or it's taken something out, move it. You need to back it up, move it, put it somewhere else. Let's say we're here.
Redeploying. Out.
We'll push the edge of this tree line. Obviously it's a nice spot, open line of sight all across here, so it can cover that. If it gets engaged here and it takes out a couple units, this is obviously a target. So
Go
just
back.
reverse it out, you got the time to do that now. Keeps facing front armor. Line of sight's lost. And just pull it out, pull it back. Hopefully you'll have some scouts that other units can keep line of sight here. And so you'll avoid any kind of firearm position cluster bombers or other bombs or anything which are going to be landing here. And then if needed, it can just push up
Hunting
again.
for commies.
You don't need them on the front line all the time, spotting and instantly reacting to stuff. You can just push them up. But you just got to be paying attention to where enemies pushing and your micro on the tanks. And I mean, that's pretty much third armoured, really. Keep bringing in your infantry, supporting those guys with the M728s. Keep your Apaches alive and moving about the map, providing fire support. Bombers can help out a little bit. Build up your AA network. And that's pretty much it, really. Mortars, obviously, as fire support. Actually, yeah, force supplies. Just have them positioned a bit behind the lines, coupled together or something like that, and then some pushing up to positions where you're going to have a lot of stuff firing from. Like on this map, you're going to want TOW2s in these tree lines, just covering the open bits. So you can have some supplies with them to keep them stocked up, but these supplies are going to go here. So when your Apaches fire those rockets here, just pull it back, land it in there, get it resupplied, and then it can just be used to react to anything going on and stop any pushes.
I need that tail rotor checked.
And having them a bit further back from the front line will stop your opponent knowing where they are, which means they can't plan against them specifically. They're going to have to be quite general in what they're doing, which could lead to a heavy investment in AA or in planes and things like that. And if they're investing a lot to deal with the Apaches, they're not investing a lot to deal with the
What are your orders,
M1A1s.
sir?
So that's something to keep in mind. You want to be aware of what kind of units your opponent has and how much he's spending on them. Because if you know that, you're going to know kind of what the allocation of forces are going to be on the front line and concentration. And the same goes for if these Apaches do a lot of damage, take out a lot of units, you need to know that your opponent's not going to have a lot of units left, especially in the early game. So if you do manage to wipe out a bunch of recon units on a flank, push aggressively, take as much ground as you can, and then dig in. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this deck. you'll be seeing more videos of me using it in tournament games and stuff like that, and you kind of see how I use it against an actual opponent, and whether you actually enjoy using it. But thanks for watching, guys. Catch you next time.